How are we doing? Yep, we are live. Excellent. Brilliant. Well, welcome. Welcome to another Cyber Scotland Connect remote event. My name is Harry McLaren. I'm just going to do some really quick housekeeping before we get started. So the topic of today's event is lessons from working in cyber during the pandemic. Over the last 20 months or so, there's been a lot going on for us, a lot going on for you. And we thought it'd be interesting just to assemble a panel in which, we just put a shout out into the community, and we've had a great group of people respond back. So we're going to ask them a bunch of questions. There's going to be a Slido link as well, so you can submit your own questions. We'll also be monitoring the chat on YouTube for questions. The link to Slido is in the YouTube description, and it'll be up on screen shortly. But before we get going, just some quick housekeeping. So in case you don't know who Cyber Scotland Connect are, we're a community group made up of cybersecurity and information security professionals. We lead it through moderation only. We're here for the community. We're here to hopefully to create a holistic and diverse hub for the cyber community in Scotland, but we welcome people from everywhere globally, and our core values are to be judgment-free, open and honest. We're sales and vendor neutral, so it's not a sales environment, but salespeople are welcome. And we have a zero tolerance policy to bullying and harassment. And to that effect, these are our house rules. So we are judgment-free. Anyone that's going to be speaking to you or sharing their opinion is doing just that, sharing their opinion, and we're here to listen openly and honestly to it and not to judge. Everyone that speaks is asked to be open and honest, to represent themselves and their experiences with as much openness and transparency as possible. I mentioned being sales free. No one's ever going to try and sell you something. And finally, this is a zero harassment environment. We have the Berlin Code of Conduct as part of this event and all of our events. You can find it on our website. You can also just Google Berlin COC and you'll find it. So it's a really good starting point for a code of conduct. If you have any issues whatsoever with any members of this community or event, please message any of the moderators on Slack or us on Twitter and it will be dealt with. And finally, you can, as I said, join us at Slido. So slido.com, hashtag Scott. That was for Scotland, not for one of our speakers, but hey, we've got no speakers called Scott, so that worked out really nicely. And you can use the QR code if you trust us. So without further ado, we're going to get straight into it. And if I stop sharing, you'll hopefully go straight back to a view of our lovely panelists. Hello, panelists.
Hey, Harry.
So we'll just do a really quick round table, just introducing ourselves. I'll go last. So Rich, would you go first, please? Richard Gray.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Gray. I am the Director of Information Security at Free Agent, based here in Scotland, in Edinburgh, online accounting platform for small and micro businesses, predominantly in the UK, but lots of customers worldwide.
Kevin. You're muted.
I learned that eventually, Harry, apologies. So, hi everybody, I'm Kevin Gray. I'm the National Security Operations Lead for NHS National Services Scotland. We are a national services agency and we cover the 22 organisations within Scotland.
Great to have you, Kevin. Scott.
Cheers, Harry. I'm Scott. I'm currently working over at Quorum Cyber as a senior security engineer. I believe my job title is. I had the great fun of changing jobs during the pandemic, so that should be a fun panel for me.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Waqar, I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Harry. And like Scott, I also changed my job during the pandemic. And yeah, so I work as DevSecOps. I work for a company called Pfizer, not Pfizer, not the medical company, the financial institution. I was one of their first DevSecOps hires, so I have a kind of a okay story to tell as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Rich McFarland.
Hi, I'm Rich McFarland. I am an Associate Professor in Cybersecurity at Edinburgh Napier University and head up our kind of master's programs and things like that. So yeah, it's been an interesting 18 months. That's it.
Indeed, it has. And last but well, and least, would be myself. So Harry McLaren, I'm one of the co-founders of Cyber Scotland Connect. During the day and sometimes the night, I'm the product lead for detection and response at Adama, headquartered here in Edinburgh. So we've had a few questions come in over Twitter, over Slack, but I thought I'd just kick us off with one that I'll ask everyone, and we're all friends here, or at least friendly, so I'll not name names to go first. But if everyone can just do, 2 to 3 minutes summary of, just the entire 20 months, if possible. No, I'm only joking. Just, let's go with two things that were positive or positive-ish, and two things that are really challenging for you over the pandemic, and let's see as a springboard where that starts. So starting with Scott.
Sure. Two things that are really positive for me would be I did change kind of career, but mainly just the job that I do. Went from working for myself to working for a company, which is really bizarre, but just the positivity of everyone kind of around that, like kind of pushing me or at least accepting me, or pulling me in with open arms a little bit, and kid gloves in some regards, because I've worked for myself for as long as I can remember. So it's very new to me. I'm working for someone, but yeah, between that, it's the community stuff. So for a second, the community stuff is, holy crap, that's awesome. During the pandemic, there's been a lot of good that's come out of it. I'm actually sitting here with, you may know or not know it, but InfoSec Happier. Some of you have joined, which was kind of cool to see all these different groups and communities like kind of spring out of the pandemic, and not focus on the drama, actually focus on some cool stuff, drink together and get each other through the pandemic. There's been some really cool lifelong friendships that have been made from groups like InfoSec Happier. There are others, obviously. That's really cool to see. That's been positive bit.
That's great. Someone else want to go next?
I'm happy to jump in. I think for us, positives was just being able to walk out of the office and carry on working. We were in a very, very lucky position that we were already geared up for fully remote working, certainly within the engineering department within Free Agent. Luckily, just the Christmas before, actually 2019, I finished our corporate IT guys to actually move to a VoIP solution away from hardwired telephones. And that was actually the last anchor that would have kept us otherwise in the office. So yeah, I think the week before, about the 15th of March, I think it was, we just, everybody, not quite down tools, but just picked up our laptops, which everybody has, walked out of the office and carried on working, because we have the benefits of everything that we use are all SaaS-based solutions. We're moved into AWS also while we're on during the pandemic, Google Docs, all that sort of side of things. So we really had no physical ties to any office or any infrastructure. So that was super positive for us that there was no impact effectively for that. I think the negative side of things is, I think we're probably realizing it a wee bit more. We've sort of recently gone back to sort of a little bit of hybrid working. So some people are going into the office some days, some people aren't, some people are still staying remote. I know I'm not getting on the train at the moment, but it's, yeah, suddenly, people have got this Zoom fatigue, and here we are all on Zoom. But also those that are back in the office are now realizing, or those, when they are back in the office, those that are remote are sometimes feeling that slightly second-class citizen. And sometimes if there are meetings going on in person, it can be quite, it's not a deliberate thing that the remote people aren't included, but it's very easy for people face-to-face in a room to read the room, read the expressions, read the body language that sometimes gets missed perhaps on a Zoom call, or other platforms are of course available.
Who else would like to chime in?
In terms of academia, we've had a sort of interesting 18 months, which has been up and down. We were in an interesting position in terms of we'd done quite a lot of distance learning teaching. So we had quite a lot of experience with virtualized platforms for practical teaching, using all these tools that everyone else has, or a lot of people have had to learn all about. So it was quite good for us in terms of we could help other colleagues in our school and across the uni and also push for some of the tools to be upgraded and some new things and some budget and things like that. We actually got some budget for bigger to expand our virtualized teaching platforms. So we can run a few thousand more virtual machines for students now. So that was all interesting. And yeah, people started listening to us about some of the distance learning and online teaching stuff, which was a nice change. But yeah, I suppose just the general stuff, yeah, I mean, flexibility was good in terms of, yeah, being able to roll out of bed into meetings and work whenever you want. But that, you know, I'm an academic, so that's normal anyway. But yeah, I think, you know, flexibility of working and stuff has been interesting and probably quite positive in a lot of ways. But I think the usual negatives, the same sort of things. You know, I don't think Zoom meetings or meetings online, video calls are in any way a replacement for face-to-face. You know, they're great for some things, but I just don't think they replace that social aspect. They definitely can't replace your corridor meetings and water cooler meetings and just that general social interaction and bonding and taking ownership of things that you get from working with other people in person. So yeah, I don't think they're a replacement. I think that's maybe one of the issues, that they've become a replacement, and maybe some companies will see that as a way of continuing it and saving money.
Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, I'll go next, Harry. So I think for me, it's funny, there's a couple of opposites here for me. So I discovered as a result of the pandemic that suddenly it was easier to get a hold of people because I worked in an environment where most people worked in an office, and they were an absolute nightmare to get a hold of at the end of a Teams call. But suddenly they were available now, and that's been really, really positive. Obviously, being within the NHS, things haven't really been that quiet over the last 18 months, particularly obviously for the nurses, but my colleagues within the IT teams in particular have been absolutely hammered. From a security perspective, you know, things got really interesting for us really, really quickly. Literally overnight, we had NCSC throwing themselves at us, which was really, really good. We got a lot of stuff out of that. We've seen our team grow. So Harry, obviously, you've known me for a while now. Used to be effectively a one-man band. There's 8 of us now, which is good and growing. So yeah, that's been really, really good. So yeah, it's me.
And yeah, so thanks, Kevin. From my perspective, so remote working has helped me. So one, I have changed my jobs, and my previous commute was like 15 to 20 minutes, and the new commute could have been like 45 minutes each way. So that has helped definitely. Like it saves me almost 2 hours of traffic every day, which means I can give more time to family and all that. But it also has helped me because the company has become flexible working as well, and I have a newborn as well. So all of these have really, really helped me a lot. Especially I'm not from Ireland, so I don't have an immediate family here. It's just me and my wife, and that's it. So we have to take care of all of it, which has massively helped us. Second is that because I'm not from Ireland, travel to my home country, it's extremely hard. Like when we buy tickets for airplanes or airlines, sorry, you have to go through all of these kind of tests, and you don't really know what's going to happen. That's like an extra amount of pressure. So I know it's a personal thing, but imagine you have booked your tickets for at least one month before traveling. In the work time, all of the time, you are thinking like it's in the back of your head. What happens if at the last minute one of us is COVID positive? Because you know, if the kid is COVID positive, all of us can't go. That's like a pressure for people like from my background. And there's one other thing that now I'm working from my home, and if I sit idle for even few minutes, I feel really guilty. Like why I'm thinking my manager would be thinking, oh, this guy is working really hard. So that guilt has kind of pushed me to do more work than normal. But yeah, I mean, it's just a thing that I wanted to share.
There's some really interesting points. I think especially the travel one. You know, the vast majority of my friends and family are, you know, local to the UK, whether they started there or otherwise. And I think, I've very much thought of the inconvenience from a holiday point of view, but as you were highlighting, for you, especially being quite isolated, it's a completely different problem. It's a completely different set of challenges that aren't the nice to haves that they are in my life. They're the must haves that you want and need for your family. So it's a really unique perspective that I hadn't considered. Thank you for sharing that. So I think, so a couple of good things for me. I think it's helped me realize a couple of home truths. That one is, I really need relationships to get stuff done. Like, I work in a scaler, we're 300 people. I've been there for 8.5 years. My relationships are everything for me getting what I need in my job role across the organization, whether that be through marketing, our engineering team, our IT team, because I can just walk up to the head of IT who I've known for 8 years and be like, so by the way, that could you just please review that thing? And he's like, of course, Harry, no problem. Or, if there's a bit of friction over there, I can be like, look, it's fine. You know me, you trust me. This is going to be okay. I know them, I trust them. It's going to be fine. And in the last, 20 months, we've had massive growth. I think I was saying earlier, I think it's at least 70, 80 heads we've grown by, many of which have been in quite senior positions. And I don't have those relationships to draw on. And what it's exposed for me is how much I rely on person to person in the same place, in the same room, interaction to build those relationships quickly. I'll sit on your desk. I'll make sure I sit next to you to lunch. I'll, off to go for a drink with you if you just joined the organization, because I want to get to know you. Now, it's not just so I can get what I want done in the organization. It's, it's for all the positive reasons of social interaction as well. But the byproduct is that I've realized is, well, I really need those relationships, and building them virtually has been devastatingly hard because we didn't have a virtual culture. We had a mostly, office-based culture that we had dabbled at digitizing and not been that successful. So when the lockdown happened, we were able to move our workload to remote and virtual almost instantly. We're a modern organization. Most of our services are cloud, SaaS based, etc. All of us had laptops, but moving the culture to be digital is something we're still struggling with. And I think that's certainly been one of the biggest non-technical eye-openers for me, like non-security specific eye-openers, has been without intention. Your culture doesn't just digitize. You don't just go, oh, we've got this, really great group of people that are mostly in person, or at least they see each other a couple of times a month, ships passing in the night with shift workers or whatever, and we get on really well, to hold on, I actually need to schedule time in your diary to chat and so on. And that's very awkward if you've not set a precedent for it. You're a new starter and your onboarding is e-learning, and then you've maybe got a couple of meetings scheduled in your first week. What do you do? And I think in the reading I've done, it's very much been, you have to do it with intention. It is by design. Culture doesn't just happen spontaneously, especially virtually. It probably doesn't happen that spontaneously when it's not virtual, but it certainly doesn't when it's virtual. And I definitely didn't see that coming. I was just kind of like, oh, but, of course it will work out. And, in some regards, it really hasn't. And I think, we've paid the price for that in my own self. And so that would be definitely a big challenge and lesson learned for me.
It's quite interesting you say that, because certainly at FreeAgent, we've probably doubled in size during the pandemic, or maybe just previously before that. So we've definitely onboarded 60, 70, 80 staff during the pandemic who have never met anybody else in the office. The whole onboarding process, even the interview process, everything has just been online. So of course, for those people, it's even harder to have those relationships, because when they do come into the office, it's just going to be, oh, what's going to happen? I don't know if any work will get done, because there's going to be lots of just that general chat, Rich, that you were talking about, that you just don't get, when you're trying to meet people, across a video chat.
Definitely right. Okay, so I've got some other questions stored up, but I'll go to some that have been submitted by other people. Has the panel seen a positive embracing of new security technologies as a result of the pandemic? And again, just go straight into it if you've got an answer. And if you don't, I'll find a way to talk.
think from my perspective, Harry, I couldn't say I've seen an embracing of new security technologies, but we've certainly seen an increase in deployment of security technologies and the use of existing, so for example, EDRs, etc. But yeah, and that's been really, really good, particularly for my team where we're growing and we're growing out our visibility and our capability. It's been really, really good.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of, let's call it unblocking or acceleration of the adoption. So I wouldn't say I've seen an uptick in the selection of new technologies, but where, for example, you know, let's say an EDR, which is an endpoint detection and response, so it's kind of like AV++, you know, that was struggling to be rolled out on, you know, the laptops that were Windows 7, or it was struggling to be rolled out in that specific area of remote workers in that satellite office. Suddenly it was like, no, that's happening because they can't take them home until it happens, because that's the risk appetite of the business. And suddenly the risk of, oh, but what about another agent? And, you know, are we sure they were the right vendors? Done, it's happened. You know, the same thing with the adoption of, you know, technology like Office 365. You know, there's nothing like a ransomware attack taking out your entire localized AD and Exchange servers to make you embrace Office 365 suddenly very quickly. You know, it was a 5-year transformation program. It now happened over a weekend, and you've now just provisioned 30,000 new users. So, you know, much as I'm sure that was very traumatic for the teams involved, you know, I think when, well, it's a game of incentives at the end of the day. The businesses was incentivized to make those things a priority, and when things were a priority, they happen, or they should happen.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting for those of us in the smaller businesses or the newer businesses and the fintechs where we're using SaaS solutions all anyway. We probably didn't really have that problem because the digital transformation piece didn't exist because we're sort of digital babies from the start. So we've been in a really lucky position. I know we had already planned to move out of, you know, our SaaS application out of colo data centers into AWS, but that was nothing to do with the pandemic. That was just a scalability issue and having to not deal with hardware lead times, which must be even worse these days with the silicon shortage if you're having to roll out a whole load of more servers or even laptops. So thankfully, we were ahead of the game in that situation.
We managed to accelerate our two-factor authentication for all students and staff, mainly due to the large increase in phishing emails. So that was good. Yeah, we've seen some changes at the university. Yeah, just there's a lot of research changes as well. There's a huge amount of ransomware research and things like that in the last 18 months, very big spikes in certain areas. So that's interesting too.
I'm seeing a few, like, so similar to Rich's point, like, yeah, people are suddenly going, oh, we should probably do the MFA rollout now. See that old box in the corner that we were like, yeah, it's fine because it's, you know, it's behind closed doors. No one knows. We should probably deal with that now. We are seeing that kind of filter through. That's awesome. But what I'm tending to see, though, is general day-to-day people that don't work in cyber suddenly being very interested in things like phishing and things like what can happen at home. Is this work laptop I've brought home, is it scanning my own personal network because I'm not happy with that? And they're actually starting to ask the relevant questions that we've been asking for the last 10 or 15 years. That's, to me, I know it's not a new technology, it's been adopted, but people are actually starting to come to us and go, hey, how do I make sure my work laptop is separate to my home laptop? How do I make sure that, you know, the kids can watch Netflix while I'm on a video call without it dying? They're actually starting to take an interest in their own home setups. And that to me is kind of, it might not be a technology, but it's an embrace of new culture, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Kevin, go.
No, I was actually going to say, I mean, there was another, I suppose, big event that happened during the pandemic as well for the NHS. So obviously, like everybody else, there was a sudden shift to Office 365, particularly around about Teams. We already had an email migration planned and in flight from the UK's NHS email system into Scotland's own platform within Office 365. And there was an unintended consequence of that for us, which has been a bit beneficial, which was we saw a significant drop in phishing and spam attacks against us because we changed the email domain nationally. Suddenly they just stopped, and then they've been gradually picking up, and they are continuing to pick up. But yeah, it was quite good. Like, a lot of people were asking us, how many attacks have we seen? We're not really going to see that much just now because people's email addresses aren't out there.
So you heard it here first. Kevin's recommendation on behalf of the NHS: just change your TLD once a month.
Works.
Just randomly generate it. It'll be fine.
Lesson number one.
No spam.
As long as you commit it into a blockchain, right, and distributed ledger, and make sure it's updated, everyone's contact books, everything will be fine.
I would like to say a couple of things here. So, not stealing the jokes, but anyway, so in my case, what I've seen is that, so I work at a fairly big fintech. What I've seen is there is a lot of focus on security, and I don't know whether that was pushed or accelerated by pandemic, but I've seen a lot of people who were working in faraway security roles, and then they have come closer to DevOps and developers. So people have left their positions, they have come near to these positions, and they are actually now developing, closely working with developers and DevOps to actually, all the shift left movement, all of that. But that has happened after pandemic started, and somewhere like in the middle of last year or beginning of this year. So yeah, we can, maybe causation is not always correlation, if I'm saying it wrong or right. So, but yeah, that's something I've observed.
Just one thing I wanted to point back is to what Scott said. I think security awareness, we're constantly trying to push that culture. I know, Harry, you're talking about the culture virtually, you have to work. But when individuals are taking that home and asking questions about security of their home setup, that is just brilliant, because that is just starting to get them into the right mindset. And if they're thinking, oh, am I secure at home? Hopefully that sort of mindset is going to be coming and being permeating within their office and their work day-to-day life as well. So I think that's definitely a bonus.
Yes, I sit on Skills Development Scotland Cybersecurity Skills Working Group. It's a bit of a mouthful. And we've talked about this in some of the members, and it is like there's a whole bunch of events, I think, in the last few years, and there's an element of convergence. Obviously, there's the pandemic, and it's easy to ascribe everything to the pandemic. And that's the reason suddenly everyone's moved to the cloud or gone all in and digital. But actually, it's just accelerated a lot of existing plans or transformation programs to do so. And I think it's the same with things like ransomware, like the rate and the media attention and the outrage around ransomware is just exponential. From small, I've had a small business specialty being like, I've been attacked by this ransomware, how do I decrypt it? And I'm like, looked it up, looked on the various groups of people that are trying to publish free decryption tools and so on. I'm like, it's not one of them. Like, you can't. You could choose to pay it. That wouldn't be my recommendation. Restore from backup. We don't back up. You're an expert at this. Tell me what to do. Hey, I'm like, it's not really, unfortunately, about that. I can talk about preventative measures next time, but and they've learned a horrible lesson, and they're a relatively small, family-owned business. And so, I think because it's affecting more and more people, not just I get the odd bit of spam or an old email account's been compromised, but you don't use it for anything, so they think. It's now absolutely like not to overuse, but like militarized. The ability of access brokers, that the democratization of threats, where you've got nation state level tools and 0 days, but being wrapped into criminal software as a service platforms that then have affiliate programs and reselling programs, and the person technically committing the crime, as in logging into someone's computer system and doing something naughty, versus the person that sold that access versus the person whose infrastructure you're using. Could be like 5 different groups involved. And then they just rotate their IP addresses or their AWS infrastructure or their accounts, and it's all programmatic. And it's just they're using the same, DevOps principles, the same agile methodologies and tooling that we all use to try and remain competitive in our various industries. And they're doing it at scale, and they're doing it at victims, at people. And I think because essentially they're scaling way faster than we are. Because they have no legacy, in this, like what you were saying, Rich, in the same way that fintechs are ultimately, coming up against and coming for the lunch of a lot of the, legacy or large banks. Call them legacy banks, that's rude, but they're more traditional retail banks. The reason that their market capitalization is shrinking, the reason that they're shrinking is because they've got IBM mainframes they're still maintaining at 50 million a year. And they've got, all this legacy that they're paying down, all this debt they're accruing. And then you've got a fintech that just goes, oh, well, I'm just going to use this free open banking API. I'm going to build a marketplace with them. I'm going to open up an investment account with them, get some seed funding, and I'm a bank, ish. It's obviously that easy. And it's the same with criminals, though, is that, they don't have legacy. So, we're constantly but what about this cyber control you deployed last week, Rich? You still checking that? You assuring it? Oh, but you've got the ISO auditors coming in, certificates are giving that, and at the same time, and you've got someone, wielding Eternal Blue and just going, that one server you left SMB enabled on, it's gone.
It's quite weird. I mentioned earlier about awareness, and I think awareness has increased dramatically, but it's also increased dramatically because there's been more successful attacks, and that can't be an obvious correlation. You would have thought if awareness has increased, the number of attacks might have gone down because people would have been more aware of what's coming and how to protect against it. The usual simple things that people don't do, patching. You're talking about a small family business, Harry. Unfortunately, my sister was hit with ransomware. She had a NAS device that was open on the internet, and she phoned me up in a panic. Her small business, she goes, everything's encrypted. So she had no ransomware. It just gone out, obviously via Shodan. It identified the IP address, logged on with probably default administrative credentials, and just encrypted everything, nothing else. And I was really worried for her because I thought her business was gone. But luckily, everything had been backed up, so that was fine, and that wasn't connected to the internet. But the device she was using, it hadn't been patched for 12 years effectively, and still using it. So how she managed to survive, I do not know, and why she didn't ask me for advice in the first place. To understand, but
because it just worked.
Well, it did just work. Yeah, it was also in French, so I didn't understand it.
Does anyone think that the government should get involved with backups?
Absolutely not.
Really? I don't mean technically.
No, yeah. Let's clarify.
We've seen over the last 18 months that the government can step in when they want to, and they can change things. Why can't the government step in and say that not they won't provide anything, but that services have to be put in place? I mean, you can pay for Dropbox and things like that for personal backups, where your Dropbox it's got a history. So, I mean, that'll fix your ransomware problem straight away.
I would disagree for the same reason that we still hear to this day that BT have fixed the holding your phone line open for 10 seconds thing. Scammers can no longer do that. The government advice goes out of date so quickly, and people care, but they've got bigger problems to deal with. And when they get involved, I can see it getting to the point where we're putting out basically security and safety advice, where it's 10, 15 years out of date because no one thought to update it or check it or make it more relevant. And it could end up in the same situation with the green padlock effect, where eventually when it filters through the chain, it eventually becomes standard practice or standard piece of information to give out. It's actually dangerous for whatever reason. It's no longer the best practice, or we're not using, or Dropbox doesn't exist anymore, or there's some other solution that's on the market that we've never seen before, didn't even think of. I worry unless they keep up to date stupidly quickly, I honestly think it could end up, it will short-term gain, long-term problem. But that's
I guess Cyber Essentials is an attempt at that. I mean, Cyber Essentials doesn't cover obviously depth, and it doesn't. But obviously, even plus, it's the starting point, absolute starting point. But that does have mandates, I believe. Never assessed it myself, around resilience, of which backup and the ability to restore from backup, a critical component, by the way. Always test your backups. It is a part, but then the market has started to mandate that from your kind of SMB, your small and medium-sized enterprises. Most of them, it's mandated. If you're a government contractor, it's mandated. But are you going to go into a small corner shop and be like, you've got to get Cyber Essentials Plus? That's going to cost you $3,000. They're going to go, well, I can't afford that. And then you're like, and then what's more important? Is it backups? Is it AV? Is it getting externally audited? The problem is that the cost of keeping up with the adversaries that are out there outstrip most small businesses and most home users if they were targeted. And that's where I see the challenge, because you're right, Rich. I mean, the government could definitely help, and they've set some directions that help. CSC have tried to do some work on it, but how do you fund it all?
I just wonder, I mean, there are simple solutions to general ransomware problems, like paying for Dropbox Plus or whatever it's called, so you've got a history which could be put back in place. So you've got automated backups for general use and general people. I mean, you can move all your data files into, System 32 or the Windows directory. That will stop almost all ransomware encrypting it. The strange small solutions that could almost be, I don't know. I haven't thought this through exactly. We're doing a bit of research into this, and just we notice certain things now and then that you think somebody could step in and help small businesses. That they have to do something like that. They have to have some sort of service put in place, and there are simple solutions to some of these things.
I sometimes wonder, and I think not wonder, but think quite a lot. At NCSC, they've put out some really good guidance there. They've tried to strip it back to basics for organisations. They've put it out, but I don't think it reaches the people it needs to be able to see it. So, for example, they do nothing on Facebook. They target professional environments, but the small to medium business in the personal world, they're not really using LinkedIn. Obviously, they touch Twitter, but they're probably not following NCSC. And there's quite a bit that could be done there in terms of targeting them. And also potentially going back to proper old school methods, dropping leaflets through business doors, etc., to say, here's some basic stuff you could be doing, help prompt them and make them think about it. But I'm not sure. I mean, the government legislating on it, it sounds good, but the reality is, how would they police it? How would they make it happen? Would there be enough resources out there for those businesses to go to meet that mandate? I mean, I know from being within the NHS, it's really, really hard to meet what is mandated on us by government, both at a government mandate level and also from a regulatory level now as well. Obviously, it's quite a bit higher than your average corner shop would be required, but
I had this debate at that same working group with SDS, where one of the mandates or areas that we're looking into is how do you embed what is referred to as cyber resilience, which I think is a branding issue when it comes to the objective, which is how do you embed it into every college course across Scotland. And by that, I mean, hairdressers, flight attendants, how do you embed cyber resilience into those college courses? So there's already a bit of a branding problem, because you can imagine the tutor of those courses hearing, sorry, what? I want you to embed cyber resilience. It's like, okay, no. Like digital literacy, online health and safety, we need to come up with.
In there and just say something quickly.
Sure.
So we've recently been given our Centre of Excellence for Cyber, and quite a few universities have now applied and got this, and that's one of the key things that the government or NCSC are looking for. So we're looking for anyone in industry that might want to help. And things like Cyber 101 courses, open courses that can be taken by any student throughout the whole university is something that they're very keen on. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that the NCSC are we've got our finger on the pulse in quite a lot of these things.
That's good. I think there were some good NOS standards created for it, some national occupation standards that I think the Scottish Government partially funded, that were drafted and reviewed, so that they're worth checking out. The website's awful as far as the NOS website, try and find them, but if you actually find them, they're reasonably well written. So that might be a good starting point as far as syllabus for kind of Cyber 101. We do have a few questions. I feel we should bring it back to our lovely listeners / viewers. So this one is a little off topic, but still in the cyber domain. So having upped sticks myself to a new fully remote role versus an in-office in the last few months, do you think those sticking to wanting on-prem risk brain drain? Actually, no, it's completely on target. So I read the wrong one. Don't worry. But anyway, that's the question. Anyone want to jump in?
Sorry, can you just repeat it? Was about people staying in the office or we're going to lose them because they just want to go remote? Is that what it was?
It is. Let me read it out and also try and figure out where my chat's gone. I'll just read it out because my chat is completely gone. Having upped sticks myself to a new fully remote role versus an in-office in the last few months. So I think moving job role the last few months to a fully remote role. Do you think those sticking to wanting on-prem risk brain drain? So I assume that means working in an office versus working remote.
Wacker was about to say something before I rudely jumped in, so go ahead, sir.
I was asking actually the same question to repeat it, but the thing is that I would say though that it's the opposite. Like companies have more access to a lot of different people now. Like, you know, if somebody is advertising a job in Dublin right now, I'm also a candidate. I don't live in Dublin. I'm based in Limerick. But just a year and a half ago, if the job is in Dublin, I have to be in certain vicinity. So now they have access to everyone in Ireland. Doesn't matter where they are. And if they can say, oh no, not Ireland, everyone in the UK. So now I have access to more companies, and companies have more access to access to a lot of different people from different backgrounds, of course. So I would say it's the opposite. So switching to remote, I wouldn't say it is going to brain drain. It's actually going to keep a lot of people in the physical locations where they are. What I would be concerned is that maybe remote might not be suitable to some people who would be more willing to work with people, like, you know, chatting with people, all the, like, you know, face-to-face interaction, like so there are people with different personalities. So yeah, in that case it might drain their energy levels, but brain drain, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, I wonder if different roles as well from cyber lend themselves to working better remotely. So, you know, if you're working within a security operations or an incident response role where during a major incident, it's really handy to be next to the group of people that you're working with. I wonder if we'll see a move towards keeping some of that capability in the office as in a core capability while the rest of the team work remotely. It's certainly something that we're looking at anyway. You know, we're very much looking at a work from home first, but have a core capability on site so that when the proverbial happens, you know, there's a small group of people that are working actively together and not trying to figure out whether or not the person I need to speak to is at the end of the phone or if they're speaking to someone else, etc.
Yeah, it can be easy to very broadly say things like, you know, all jobs should be remote first, or all jobs can be remote first. And I think we often overlook the humongous privilege we have, generally speaking, of having even an option to go hybrid, let alone possibly all remote. Yeah. And there will always be a spectrum of advantages and disadvantages that are more or less likely depending on the domain, the location, but so much of that is set by culture. you can have an remote-only organization. So I think of ones that I hold in high esteem from what I see outside looking in. Obviously, I don't work there, of like GitLab, where they've primarily been remote only. I don't think they've got any office locations. They occasionally like gatherings or swarming activity in dev teams, but they have cultivated from the beginning a culture of, now I think it's like 2,500 people where they're just remote. But they've done it with huge intention. I mean, you read their employee handbook, which is completely open, like all their documentation. They've got a public first policy on documentation, which I think is incredible as an organization. They just publish it. It's like, no, you've got to justify why it should be private, which some should, right? Some should. But so you can just go and read it. You can fork it. You can even create suggestions and create issues for them to merge it back into their production branch. It's great. But if you read the sections they have on remote working, curating remote communication on Teams, on asynchronous, synchronous communication, all this stuff, you're like, wow, they have spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours, and I'm sure many experts, to make sure their organization works appropriately virtually and remotely across a global stage, versus an organization that has just kind of gone, okay, we're remote now. And then they wonder why people feel disengaged, or the great resignation, as Rich mentioned earlier on. You start seeing those behaviors and like, oh, but why? But it's like, well, because a third of your culture was going for beers after work, which no one can do anymore. And because you believed that loyalty just magically happened, it wasn't built on behaviors and built with intention, you've now lost a whole group of awesome people. And I think this, to bring this right back around to the question, it's the same kind of thing of, I don't think you're automatically disadvantaged, full stop, because that would be a sweeping statement. You've got to look at the company, look at their culture, hopefully understand, do they work in one way or other with intention? And if they do so, then hopefully you'll be really successful there. And as an individual, if you're hungry to learn and so on, you'll be successful anywhere. But you've got to understand that it's a multidimensional problem, and it's not just well, I work from home or I work in the office. It's very much going to be based upon the type of company you work for, the type of work you do.
What about people starting off their careers as well? I mean, I read a lot of stats, like 75, 80% of people prefer to work from home, or want to work from home as part of a hybrid model kind of thing, which I think makes sense. As we've said, a lot of flexibility and things. But what about students? That have never worked in an office or with a company or with anyone, and they've got to start from scratch. Even not having our meetups to go to, I'm finding our students aren't engaging in the same way with the wider community. And even at university, I'm finding our NUSEC community, our kind of student community, our cyber community isn't as well attended. I don't think our classes are as well attended online as they were in person, no matter what you try. So yeah, it's an interesting. I don't know what the panel thinks. If you can put yourself in a position of, being a graduate attempting to get into the industry.
How are you measuring that, and when?
How are we measuring?
The attendance rate. So if your talks are online on YouTube, like, you just looking at the live views, or are you looking at over a period of time? Like, what?
I think the video content's okay. I don't think it's changed a huge amount in terms of people interacting with recorded content. What I found is the live sessions, where you maybe have breakout rooms and practical sessions, trying to replicate what you do in a tutorial or lab environment. Those are the ones that I've been surprised at, and they're not being attended as well, and have had a bigger drop-off rate than normal. And across various different teachers, lecturers, subjects, not just my own experience, across various different modules and teaching experiences and different types of, discussion or practical sessions or all different things.
Has that been from the outset, or has there been a gradual decline as people got more and more worn by being online all the time?
I would say generally from day one, it's just not been. I don't know that. I mean, there's a whole variety of different reasons we've discussed at the university, but I think part of it is just that social thing. That kind of working with other people is just different online, and you can't replicate that classroom, getting to know people, and then kind of working with them after you've got to know them a little bit, and you've maybe bonded with people that are similar, or you've got some sort of social aspect first. And if you read teaching pedagogy about teaching online, that's one of the main things is creating a social space and getting people to interact before you start even really teaching them. But yeah, no, I've been surprised by that, because we do an awful lot of virtualized environments, and we replicate a lot of the stuff we do in person quite closely. So I've been surprised at the lack of interaction. I thought it'd be an opportunity for students to maybe learn some of the this type of thing, meeting online and getting used to using these technologies and things. But yeah, it definitely hasn't worked out quite as I expected.
Sorry, Richard, my question sounded really, really sharp and stuff, like, how are you measuring this? But the reason where it was coming from was more basically the same as you. Was the idea was, I've seen it as well in various things, whether it be a conference or whether it be like a Canada cyber competition that I was involved in. It took a lot of prodding to get people to do something they'd already signed up to do, which was very bizarre. And because it was digital, it was fully remote and fully virtual. A lot more prodding than what I anticipated there needed to be, which was quite interesting. But what I did find as a kind of secondary point was people were kind of doing things at their own time, because they didn't feel restricted that they had to be there at 9 a.m. I am not a morning person. If you give me the choice between 9 a.m. and 1 a.m., I'm going to choose 1 a.m. every single time. And what I found was, when I actually expanded the stats out, going, okay, when were the students actually hitting these challenges? There was a handful that were hitting them during the time frame, a handful that were doing them at like 2, 3 a.m. because and it actually kind of balanced out. But after the fact that I had to prod them 500 times to go sign up to this portal, go and do this thing, go and do that. So I don't know how to read that one. I think you're right. It's since the pandemic hit, everything just went, kind of sucks.
I think there is another factor as well, and well, it's my own personal experience. A lot of people might not be that motivated to pursue their degree anymore. So they might start with very high dreams, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to become a software engineer, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to build another next Facebook, or all of that. And then when they get into the university, they have to learn a lot of maths, and a lot of people don't actually anticipate that, oh, they have to do like calculus as well. Like, why do we need calculus? Maybe in gaming. So a lot of those courses, they don't foresee that, and when they get involved into that, their motivation level might get down. And I've seen people either dropping out intentionally or unintentionally as well because of those courses. And maybe that distant learning, as Rich has mentioned before, that like there is no social cohesion anymore. So there is no one to kind of comfort them that, yeah, you just go ahead with another 6 months, you will be fine. Go ahead another year. You just have one more year to left and to go, and you will have your own project, and then you can have a good job or whatever you want to do in your life. So maybe that lack of motivation might be the factor here.
I think that there's something that with my family and friends, we started calling the background radiation of the pandemic. And I think we refer to it in passing, but we actually don't focus much on it. And that there is I think anyway, I think there is a large majority that we're not operating on full cylinders. We might be going through the motions, but we've got the crushing externalities of life, just full stop, which we all go through, which is the human experience, and we all have good days and bad days depending on what the world is throwing at us. We then work in industry, and one of few, where we have active adversaries trying to undo our efforts, or at worst come after us, our countries, our friends, our families, our businesses. There aren't many other jobs that have that. They might fight against nature, or wildfires, which are all highly difficult and complex jobs, but it's not a person sitting there going, I'm going to plot against you. I actively want to do you and yours harm. But then there's this pandemic, and I don't think it's been as much of an overt pressure from the top as much as it's been background radiation from the bottom. And I think COVID itself, that as in the virus has been, but the isolation, the fear, the frustration, the anger, and honestly, the apathy has just been slowly wearing away at people's foundations. And so I know I'm less engaged. I'm less engaged with most of the social things that I've done, whether that's Slack groups, Twitter, social media, events, wanted to contribute, wanted to present, wanted to share my take and my thoughts, have a blog post, whatever, all of those things. The life has just slowly been eaten away. And there's been days and weeks when it's just been all my energy just to go to work. And even then, did I really show up the way I showed up possibly 2 years ago? Maybe not. Some days yes, some days no. And I think that is something that is going to be the asterisk over any studies and stats and things we infer from the last 2 years, because it's not just, but people were physically ill, or physically mourning a friend that might have passed because of COVID. It's the background radiation that is so hard to quantify, but is so ever present.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's, at the end of the day, a general sweeping statement here, but most of us are social animals, and we want to have that human face-to-face interaction. And I think being stuck behind a screen can just be soul destroying sometimes.
I agree. I recently went to B-Sides Newcastle. I was one of the MCs there this year in person, which was weird. So the year before it was all virtual. And obviously BeerCon last year as well was fully virtual, and we're doing it fully virtual again this year, but with an element of us being in the studio. That will be weird, but it was almost like a teenager's first outing to the pub when they were able to legally drink. Everybody went a bit crazy, and because all of a sudden you were in a room that you were in a conference, okay, you were sitting far away, but these are people that have come from, you're used to drinking with them or hanging out with them at work, or you're used to drinking with them in a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever it may be, and hanging out after work, and suddenly you're all in the same room from basically the four corners of the UK, if not further afield, and you're all there together in person. Everybody went a bit crazy. It kind of felt as if, like, it was not party central, but it did feel as if everyone was like, wow, let's do all the things and let's organize loads of things for the next 5 years. We're going to find a lot more of that, I think. But, I think everybody's just excited to get back out of the house and not have to stare at a little square and, have to fix the lights or whatever it may be and run off and miss half the conversation. They can go outside and have that smoke with someone and not miss the conversation. I think we'll find more of that.
It's interesting. We obviously talk about burnout in the security industry, and I think that's just relevant now to everybody. And almost since we've been coming out of the pandemic, I found, not me, because I'm not one of those likes to socialize. I'm a miserable hermit. But my wife, we're just getting inundated with requests. Oh, we've got to do this. And you suddenly think, you've just gone from seeing nobody, and then now every single spare minute of your time, somebody's wanting a piece of you, and you can think, well, so you've almost got the worst of both worlds there. Now that's got nothing to do with security, but there you go.
Well, but no, hang on, it does, because it impacts it. It's like Harry was saying, like, you're not the same person. We're not the same people we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when you said pandemic, It was a board game, and 28 days later. Now it's very, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of worried about this happening again, or a resurgence of whether it be COVID or something else. Like, this happens again and I'm stuck at home for a long period of time. I'll probably be fine because I spent most of my life working from home anyway. But what knock-on effect does that have on my colleagues or my friends or my family who don't work in cyber and are completely new to all this computer stuff, where they're having to completely scoop up their entire document, like doing everything from paper to suddenly doing spreadsheets, that is a complete culture shock to them. If we have to go through all that again, it might not just be a pandemic where we're all stuck at home. It could be something else. Like, what's the next thing that's going to come? And I'm carrying that through with me into my job and into what I do in a general day-to-day basis. And it sounds like I'm a conspiracy theorist nut job, but I'm kind of quite worried and planning ahead for that, going, well, we've got to think about if this kind of situation arises again, if we're cut off for any reason, if there's no fuel, or if there's no toilet roll in the supermarket, what are we going to do? You have to think about that. And I think that does play into what we do on a general daily basis. Whether you work in a SOC or whether you work just giving out cyber advice, you're going to be thinking about how the last year or two has impacted you and how it may impact in the future based off of what you've seen. Personal opinion.
The pandemic's been an eye-opener for the realities of shit getting real. As at the same time as Brexit getting real, at the same time as elements of climate change continuing to get real, and so on and so forth. And although on across many metrics that matter, the world has never been a better place, there are other metrics that also matter, show that there are areas that are really struggling. And I think, the pandemic just accelerated awareness of so many of these things, the weaknesses in our supply chains that we've eroded over time by having, just-in-time manufacturing and manufacturing that is mostly done across another continent, and then compounding that with weather patterns, looking at countries like the United States and going like, one of their largest states, which is the size of like a third of Europe, like Texas, almost going to an entire electrical grid meltdown. These kind of things that you kind of like, you didn't see examples like that in the developed world. So it's very much kind of being like, oh, you think you're safe? Oh, so you think everything's okay? Welcome to the last 2 years of our lives. And you've probably seen it. It's that little graphic on Twitter where it's it's like COVID is this massive tidal wave, but behind that is Brexit, and behind that is climate change as just increasingly large tsunamis, and so the background anxiety, and mix that, Scott, with what you said, if we're not the same people, and I think that's true. The intensity of the pressure, I think, is probably, it's probably physically changed our brains in some respects. There'll be clusterings of paths that didn't exist before, staring at screens without eye contact. We'll have done all kinds of weird things. And like I've gone from being a mostly, although I guess an ambivert, I've gone to being much more introverted, far more fearful of social situations, far more socially anxious than I've ever been before, because I'm totally out of practice. I've gone from practicing those skills every day, and every day having usually positive reinforcement that I have those skills and that people generally will receive me, to being literally, I've only looked into the eyes of my cat and my partner, and they're lovely eyes, but you can only go so far. So we've got a few more questions that have come in. One, Scott, is specifically directed at you from our friend Mike. One thing I found difficult with work from home is ambient noise, kids, pets, deliveries. I'd be keen to hear Scott's take on this.
So this is a leaf blower question. It's part of my saga, and it wasn't the one that you submitted either. So. But no, working from home, I've worked from home for a very long time, like I keep saying, and it was absolutely fine until about 6 months before the pandemic kicked off, and it's just ambient noise everywhere. I think we've got our grass cut every single day since the pandemic started by 6 different companies, and delivery drivers buzzing their door, and before it was kind of actually kind of difficult to explain to people you were working from home and there was noise in the background, or whatever it may be, and now it's just par for the course. People don't care. I've been in calls with people whose kids have just walked on the screen and gone, look at this toy, and then left. And that's customers, that's not like colleagues, and it's just par for the course. But before, it used to be, you had to open the window and bung them 20 quid to shut up before you did the radio interview, the TV interview, whatever you're going to do next, to go, can you just kill the leaf blower? But yeah, I know it's a funny question. I know it's purely just to wind me up, because I do genuinely have problems with leaf blowers coming around in my house all the time. But it does pull it into perspective that you can really tell a lot about your company or who you work with by the reaction to stuff going wrong, like kids coming through and going, look at this toy, or having to disappear because the dog's throwing up or the cat's throwing up in the background. You can hear it. Nothing makes you move faster than a dog ready to go, right? You move super quick, and people just, yeah, that's fine, that's par for the course. Whereas before, I think they would have been a bit offended, and not like, how dare you put me on mute to deal with your dog? No, I'm the customer. Now people are like, hey, like, I've been there. I think that's pretty cool.
The great leveler, which is, forgetting to unmute, people, whether young or old, in the background or needing your attention, deliveries, all these things. It's like the pandemic for, well, we've got a really fast interconnection, do you? And it's gone. I'm on the hotspot, really sorry, my gigabit per second fiber to the building has just been cut through by a pneumatic drill. Oops, sorry. So unprofessional of you, says no one, because everyone's worried that's going to happen to them as well. Okay, so any advice on how to make a career change into the cybersecurity field during a pandemic when in-person networking events are limited?
I think that's a difficult one to answer.
Very
to be
difficult.
honest. I think probably from a personal perspective, to some extent, I followed a fairly traditional path into cybersecurity. I started in IT when I was 16 and worked my way through various different roles and eventually became a security guy. Although I couldn't say as someone who's ever employed people that actually I found an employee at an event. May just happen to be because I didn't really do events until I got into security, and up until after the pandemic, we didn't really take anyone on. But I don't think that there not being events at the moment, or in-person events, really hold you back from getting a job. I think it's important that people do actively look at the what's available online. Obviously, within the security community, posts are shared quite a bit, as well as within the traditional job markets. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the key word in that question was network, and it doesn't have to be an in-person. There's lots of opportunities, and I'm actually helping a young lady who's the sister of a colleague of mine who reached out and said, "Hey, my sister's just transitioning. She's just done an English degree, and she's thinking of doing a cyber security degree." And we're all going, "What?" And I go, "Absolutely, do it." And here's a whole load of resources, and here's some, typical job specs, and people are looking out for that diversity of thought and diversity of experience. And there's definitely lots of, I don't think a lack of in-person events should be holding you back. In fact, even more so if you're not in the industry, a virtual event like this where, you don't even have to have your screen on, you don't have to say anything, you can just sit and listen. There's a heap of benefits to actually not being an in-person networking sometimes.
I think there are, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so I would say, so it depends on, what is your background and to what security level you are changing it to. So I've seen a lot of people who have worked as test engineers, and then for them, I've seen outside of the security world, they are for them, that's the easier thing to go towards security, because they've written a lot of code, they've already broken software in some ways, and they kind of now have to exploit that. So they have this in their mind, that how to actually break it. So if you're coming from an IT background, or you have some software background, you're a system administrator, you might have been already exposed to it. And if you are that person, I would strongly suggest go with any of those GOAT series. So there is like a web GOAT, there is a cloud GOAT, there's a Terraform GOAT. So whichever technology suits you. So these are all vulnerable, quote unquote, what could I say, applications or Terraform scripts. You can exploit them. There are answers available over there on GitHub. a lot of repos already have answers to them. So if you're coming from technical background, yeah, that's I would strongly suggest that that's the way to go forward, or that's like personal opinion. And if you're from totally non-technical background, somebody who has not been exposed to software engineering or IT in any sense, then yeah, definitely you probably would like to need a mentor. And as Richard mentioned that, there are a lot of virtual events. You can also just start on YouTube. Like I've seen there are like 8 hours to 10-hour courses. I know it looks haunting to sit in front of a screen but you don't have to do that in one go. Maybe start very simple, start with HTML, CSS, and then, slowly move forward. So yeah, just my 2 cents here.
I have to agree. I think one of the coolest things is seeing actual people who are non-cyber get into cyber during the pandemic, purely because they were drinking on a call with someone on a Friday night, or they were purely in the same place at the same time. Just because it's a pandemic, we don't have those physical events where you do go to the bar and go, let's grab a coffee, let's grab a beer for 5 minutes, and you meet that person who then introduces you to someone else. Doesn't mean to say it still can't happen. It happens all the time on Twitter. I think every single person in this room that I've interacted with, we interacted over Twitter first. Like, we haven't met at a bar, we haven't met at a physical event, even before the pandemic, even though we were aware of each other, even though we live in the same region. That's, and we're interested in the same stuff. The same thing can apply to most of the people that I interact with, or most of the organizations I'm involved with, was we met via Twitter or LinkedIn or another online community. So I think for the most part, some people are very, very nervous about reaching out to people in the industry to go, hey, I'm kind of interested to get in. How do I go about doing it? And I always say there's 2 things. One, pick someone that works for you. And the second one is, if they don't respond, that's on them, not on you, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, so I mirror and agree with everything that's been said, but with a little caveat, or I guess an extension, but possibly off it, maybe a little in a separate direction. For me, it's about barriers to entry. The only barrier, and it is a barrier, at a physical event is turning up. Once you're there, there are all kind of external pressures, hopefully positive ones, that might push you to interact and to take those leaps of faith that help build your network, build your reputation, to start making links into the industry, whether you are a complete, quote, unknown and have no skills, or whether you are a super elite hacker type. The barriers are attend, and are introverted and struggle socially. If it's a good community, there will still be people there that are trying to go around, draw people out of their shells, interacting with people, buying them a beer, buying them a Coke, buying them a coffee, whatever. So when it's virtual, I would say that there are possibly some additional barriers, but the physical barrier is being removed. So it's not that there's no longer barriers. I think you're shifting the barriers. And I think that's important to articulate, because you're going to get, quote, picked on, again, hopefully in a very positive way, less probably virtually, again, unless it's been created with intention. If you are joining a happy hour, if you are joining an online networking event, you have to ensure there are facilitators that are going to say, oh, someone has joined, please introduce yourself. Oh, please come off camera. You don't have to, but it'd be great to see you. There are ways that you can be drawn out, and hopefully then you start to form those connections and build them up. But there are people that will really struggle making that first, I'm going to just tweet at this person. Oh my God, they've got 1,000 views. That's so many more than I do, even though, we know those metrics mean nothing, or they should mean nothing. They can mean something to someone. And I think in-person events can be a bit of a leveler, because the we're not floating around with whether we're verified on Twitter or, our amount of stars on GitHub or whatever else. And so I just think, both are amazing opportunities, but that you can't approach both in the exact same way. And so if you're looking to get something out of these events, like networking or opportunities, you have to go in with intention, and it's almost certain you'll find it one way or the other. but just bear that in mind, have a game plan, be a good, kind human in any of these settings. And hopefully, if you've picked the right group of people, they will show you nothing but that in return.
I think probably shameless plug, Harry, for the Cyber Scotland Connect Slack group. Get on there. There's a recruitment channel. Post a message to say, hey, I'm looking for a job in cybersecurity. Can anybody help? There are a lot of good people that are in that group that will step in and offer help.
100%.
Maybe we need a mentors channel in there as well for people looking for that sort of help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also,
wait, we don't have a mentors channel? Well, we should.
I know. I'm just thinking that as he goes looking.
there is also one thing I actually forgot to mention, is that a lot of people assume that security or cybersecurity, information security is all just technical. I think we should also propagate that there is a lot of aspects to this information security which are not technical at all. Like, you don't have to know all, you don't have to write an exploit or shell code. You could be like a normal functioning human being and still in security. And that's something I keep telling to a lot of people who just like, when they see some black screen with some text on it, they just get terrified. I'm like, that's not what security people do.
Yeah, data protection, GDPR, risk management. There's a whole, the field is extremely wide.
Yep.
And we need more people with good soft skills. I'm fed up being the person that's thrown towards a TV camera, thrown towards a radio mic just because I can speak in public. That's fine if people don't want to do it. It's more just we need people with soft skills more. But I absolutely love the fact that we're, by definition, what you've just said, we in this room just now are not normal functioning individuals. I love that. I think that's awesome. I'm gonna get that in a t-shirt.
It's a good point. But actually, Scott, I think it's just because they love your hair. That's why you go in the TV camera. It's all in the hair, mate. Right. So I'm conscious of time, and people have little of it to spend on themselves. So we've got 2 remaining questions. So I'm going to set us with a rough deadline of top of the hour, just to free up everyone to go and spend time on themselves and their families. But let's see if we can get through his next 2 questions. So question number 1. Do the panel think working practices and security deployments will go back to pre-pandemic approach? So of practices that have changed or been accelerated, do we think we'll see them revert? Things like working from home, allowing people to take laptops, physical equipment home, can't trust them, they might sell it in a boot fair, you never know. Can we trust them?
I think I've got mixed emotions about that one, actually. There's an element of I hope not, and there's an element of I think some things do kind of need to go back to pre-pandemic. There's a lot thrown in quickly, and we talk about legacy and debt, and actually because of the rapidness of how quickly some things were deployed, there's probably quite a bit of cleaning up to be done now. But at the same time, it's been great to see the acceleration of adoption as well, and I hope we could find a balance between the 2.
I'd be interested to see in what happens people in general. I think everybody wants to be remote or hybrid at the moment. I think that'll be interesting to see what happens in 6 months' time when everybody has been through that, and those sat at home are missing out on what's happening in the office, and they decide, oh, I'm going to go into the office a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then you're back to that 4 or 5 days a week. That could be the most interesting development.
Yeah, it's a really interesting cover version of Tears for Fears. Everybody wants to rule the world. Everybody wants to work from home. I'm kind of worried about your old school. I'm thinking, my parents, or a friend of mine's parents, I use as a quintessential example of, well, you should just be grateful that you've got a job, and you should just always do what the policeman tells you. That kind of, old-timey attitude of, I don't want the staff working from home anymore. They've had their break, they've had their treats, and you'll find some people clawing bits back, and we could end up in a very dangerous position of this halfway house, where it's going to take time before that person moves on, retires, or moves department or whatever it may be before it gets back to where it was. And I actually worry about that more than a straightforward blanket. Nope, everybody back in the office. I worry about the halfway house, because that's where we're going to see the risk. That's where we're going to see the problems. And that's where we're going to be woken up at 3 a.m. going, oh God, what happened? Why would you ever do something like that? And then finding out later it's the halfway house situation.
There's also, there needs to be the appreciation that it's not always appropriate for some people to work from home, and that some people need or want heavily to be in the office, whether that is because perhaps the home environment is not ideal. That could be for, let's call them good reasons, like possibly there is a caring situation at home, whether that be vulnerable adults or children, but there could also be abusive reasons why they want to go into a workplace to feel safe, to be safe, and as well as digital poverty, all kinds of other reasons. And I think it's easy to sit in relatively well-paying jobs with probably some of the best equipment money can buy and be like, well, yeah, of course, work from home is easy. I can work just as efficiently here with my standing desk and anti-fatigue rubber mat that costs £50 and so on and so forth, versus a person who's, using a 7-year-old laptop they upgraded to Windows 7 and going like, Teams drains its 12-hour battery, but the one plug socket that's still connected to the mains is being used for kettle. It's just so easy to forget that we are so unbelievably privileged. But that's not to say that these movements still shouldn't have our attention. It's just doing so and making sure we bring those people with us and not leaving them behind to the point where remote only and suddenly there are no or very few in-person jobs. And well, if you're not willing to make the investment in all these things at home, tough luck. And employers just stop thinking about giving you equipment. Bring your own device. Oh, it makes it easier for you, right? I don't have a device. Oh, so that's a prerequisite. Anyway, next question, and we've got one more that snuck in. So I'm going to close the questions now, but we will try and fit them both in. We will. Pre-pandemic, was there interactivity in the office? And picturing people fixed to their screens, given the field, still would have been breaks, camaraderie, etc. Yeah.
What does interactivity mean? Is that behaving in the office, misbehaving in the office?
I think it's possibly asking, are the people that have moved from spending all the time in the office with the headphones on the computer virtually to doing the same at home? Perhaps people that work in satellite offices that are all remote to other people anyway, remote teams, etc. So that the change was, I would go into the office and stare at my computer, not talk to anyone because it's a team I don't know, versus, well, I now do that from my home. So what's the difference?
I suppose a lot depends on the individual. Again, we were talking earlier about introverted versus extroverted. We say we have people who want to just sit in a quiet space. They don't want to listen to somebody on a remote call sitting next to them, whether they've got the headphones or the microphone or whatever. Other people who don't want to be in isolation for reasons that, Harry, you were talking about earlier, want to be in the office and want to have friends in that social interaction, right? So it's I think everybody's different. So, but yeah, we'll have spent lots of time in the office and you're still slacking individuals because they might be head down in work and you don't want to interrupt them. So you've got this asynchronous communication going on as well. So same difference.
I love in-person communication for building those relationships, as I mentioned earlier. For what I've learned is called intelligent friction, where you want, high friction in a team. So you're disagreeing a lot, but it's appropriate and you're forming and storming an idea. And I've done some of my best work in front of a massive painted whiteboard wall, and we spent 12 hours just, oh, mate, it's this, no, it's this, and no, I don't think that's what throwing my legs. I think it's more like this. And the first thing, and it's some of the best work we've done all year was that on-site, off-site, as we called it. And then that I need 8 hours to then build that diagram with no interruption because I'm going deep into draw.io and I really don't want to be interrupted. And it's, it's not all or nothing. There's appropriate times for one versus appropriate times for the other. And I think the key is choice and being educated in that those choices need to be made with an awareness of there's better ways to have certain types of meetings versus other ways of having other types of meetings, and that deep work's a thing and all those kind of things too.
Well, I disagree. Just because we can. No, I went the opposite way. That's the weirdest thing here. So I don't have an opinion on that topic, but I have an opinion on the topic itself, because I went from being fully isolated for well over a decade into now being constantly hounded on Teams. It's very bizarre and strange to be contacted all the time, which is new to me. And I think that the office will be when it's physical one-to-one, it was going to be very, very, very strange for me. The last time I worked in an office was over a decade ago. So that will be very bizarre for me. I don't know how I'm going to react to it. And certainly just now, it's certainly new to me. Being constantly hooked in. I'm still finding myself doing the nighttime deep dive, leave me alone, headphones on. But does that mean I'm working more?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's a difference between output and outcomes, right? Sorry, Rich.
I was just going to say, I think there are some boundaries between the office and home, that have basically become quite fluid. I mean, as you can probably see, because I haven't got a blurred background, I'm working from my sofa. Yeah, and I think sometimes that can become a problem, depending on, as Harry was talking about, your quality of equipment and the type of accommodation you have and the family situation. And yeah, I've been surprised throughout the pandemic at the different problems people have had, from having no interaction to a change in their social interaction to having their kids sitting on top of them during meetings and 24 hours a day. And the opposite situations being just as problematic, but in different ways. It's quite fascinating, really. And it's, I think Harry said it again, I think we all have to, probably in our industry, have to keep in mind that we're probably all in a reasonably privileged situation, no matter, of all these things, compared to people in certain other jobs. We're seeing our city centres change. We're seeing our jobs that are service-based and that people have to be in a city centre and retail and things like that, possibly suffering and never coming back from this. So yeah, I think we all have to maybe think about that too.
Awesome. Right. So I'm going to ask our final question and then release you all. So as a couple of you have started new roles remotely, what have you found have been the positive experiences and what could be improved? I think onboarding. So I think that's primarily targeted at Scott and Makar.
So I can go first if Scott allows me to. So my experience actually was very, very good. And I know it's a bizarre thing to say under pandemic, but like imagine I started work as a DevSecOps. I was the first of my kind. I went to a huge team where there are DevOps, there are application developers, there is a whole hierarchy of people. They all are sitting either in, well, mostly in Germany, India, and some of them here in Ireland. I have not seen them. So imagine, and these people are working for years with each other. Now they have this very strong social cohesion. I, a person from rural Ireland, have to ask them to do something regarding security. Now, how has pandemic helped me? Because they were not in office, we were not in office, they were not interacting with each other that frequently. I could fall through those gaps and contact different people all remotely. I could find out people, okay, this is the guy who I can target for security in application parts, and this is the guy I can target the person from, let's say, something in, if something goes on in infrastructure. And not to mention that team, the people are extremely helpful. They are extremely kind, very nice people, very open to listening to security and all of that. But that pandemic thing where I could remotely contact people and then they will asynchronously, doesn't matter well, they will reply to me, and then they will listen to me, and then we can have all of those conversations. That actually has kind of accelerated me. It's probably one of the fastest a year in my career where I was able to create relationships much more faster than if I were in my office, because then they would be physically distant and then they will have their own groupings. So yeah, that's it.
For me, the biggest, probably one of the biggest questions I've always had is just how tall are all my new colleagues, or how short are they, and what's just because you can't tell. And I find it really, I'm one of these people that when you visualize, when you're on a phone to someone, you hear the voice, you start to visualize them. I need to see a face. I'm really, really good at social interaction if it's face to face. Although not much of that's happened the last 2 years, but not having that ability to actually stand next to one another or point at stuff or do the crazy board thing that Harry was talking about earlier is really strange for me. So would I have, in hindsight, would I have gone to an office fully masked up, socially distant, and sanitization options, and fully, I don't know how you can do a crazy board sanitized, but let's just assume you can. Would I have actually taken it? Probably not, because it would be too risky, but I would have liked there to be more human interaction. The first time I met most of the people I work with was a couple of weeks ago, where we all met up as part of a kind of staff culture thing, which was awesome. But that's the first time for a lot of those people who'd been working for 6, 7, 8 months with the company had actually met one another. That's weird. Reference on but actually switching jobs or changing jobs. I've had a few friends that have gone through that process. The actual physical company corporate type, how did you deal with payroll? How did you deal with this? How did you deal with expenses? How did you deal with getting your new laptop or equipment through? That stuff is running the mill. Every company does everything totally differently anyway. And even if you were turning up on day one to a couple of boxes on your desk of here's all the swag and here's all the laptops and phones, you're always going to be kind of like, well, this is new to me, and feel a bit like a deer in the headlights. So I didn't really see any negatives or anything that could be improved. It's just a people thing, and we're social human beings. We need people involved in that process physically in front of you.
Yeah, totally agree. And we started some kind of ad hoc, so pseudo official weekly drop-in like socials, and one had 30, and we just force people into breakout rooms and I'd give icebreakers, and it was a little awkward because we weren't used to it, but we did them maybe we did 7 or 8 of them every other week, and it maybe had 15 people every week, but it was different people, and it made a difference to them. It made a difference to me to host it and to come up with 5 different icebreakers each time. And there were those, obviously, it wasn't for them. And there were those that came back. And you've just got to find those little nuggets that help individuals, whether it's the person organizing it, as was the case for me, and hopefully the people that you're offering it to. And I think that's the same thing with online events, whether they be listen only, whether they be interactive, etc. All these things are, you just got to find something that works for you. But the key is you've got to offer, especially for an organization, a platitude of means of engagement, not just, one Teams channel, one Slack channel, one Yammer portal, which is awful. You can't just have one thing, gone are the days where you can just be like, oh, well, this small cohort of users only do this way, so that must be the way everyone's going to do it in the future. No. People consume information differently. They want to engage differently. As you were saying earlier, some is synchronous, where a student wants the engagement, they want to get what they've paid for, which is tutor time. Other times they're like, leave me alone. Make sure your documentation's up to date. I'll follow it and I'll let you know if I need anything. It depends on the individual. And I think that the key again is it's choice. Give people choice and they will work out for themselves what suits them best. And if the results shit at the end, well, the results shit. And they'll learn, and next time they'll go, you know what, maybe there's a good reason why the tutors recommend we come to the live sessions, because maybe there was some information that naturally just comes out verbally and okay, lesson learned, let's move on. Anyway, this brings us to the end. So I just want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much, especially those that stepped in last minute, especially you, Scott. Really appreciate it. And it's been great to host you all. Really enjoyed the engagement on the stream as well. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions. It was great to not just have to come up with them ourselves. So thank you, everybody. Tune in next time. We've put a link to the Slack in the chat. You can find out all the details on the website as well. And I've also put a link to Beer. Check it out. They've always been epic. And that's towards the end of October. So thanks again and see you next time.
Thank you.